The house was always too quiet. It's the kind of silence that suggests stability, but really, it just hides the friction. My husband David and his sister Elena have always shared a shorthand, a way of communicating that left me on the periphery of my own life. I've spent years navigating their shared history, their unspoken agreements, and the subtle ways they've managed the family's estate. I arrived home early today, the heavy oak doors swinging open without a sound. I didn't call out. I just wanted to shed the weight of the city. I heard them in the kitchen, their voices low, rhythmic, like a well-rehearsed play. They didn't hear me enter. They were too focused on the steam rising from the stove, on the simple domesticity of preparing a meal. I stood in the hallway, the shadow of the staircase hiding my presence. I expected to hear talk of business or old memories. I didn't expect to hear my name. Elena's voice was a whisper, but it carried the weight of a verdict. "I put something in her soup," she said, her back to the doorway. "It all ends today." There was no hesitation, no tremor of guilt. It was a statement of logistical fact. David didn't object. He didn't gasp or pull her away. He just stood there, watching the liquid swirl in the pot. The air in the hallway turned cold, a physical pressure pressing against my chest. This wasn't a sudden impulse. This was a conclusion. The stakes of our quiet life had shifted from boredom to survival in the span of a single sentence. I thought about the trust I'd placed in him, the documents I'd signed, the way I'd let them manage the details because I was too tired to argue. Now the details were in the soup. I stepped back, my heels sinking into the plush rug, retreating into the shadows of my own home. I needed space to think, but the walls felt like they were closing in. I made it to the garden before the panic took hold. I sat on the stone bench, the cold seeping through my coat, and realized I was entirely alone. There were no allies in that house, no one I could call who wasn't already tied to their interests. Elena had always been the strategist, the one who saw people as assets or liabilities. Clearly, I had become the latter. I looked at my phone, the screen glowing with notifications from a life that felt a million miles away. Who do you call when your husband is watching his sister season your death? I felt the erosion of everything I thought I knew. Every shared meal, every vacation, every late-night conversation was now recontextualized as a long-term play. They weren't just my family. They were a system that had decided to purge me. The silence of the garden was no longer peaceful. It was a void. I had to move, but my legs felt like lead. I called the ambulance. I spoke in a voice I didn't recognize. Calm, precise, reporting a potential medical emergency at my address. I told them I'd be waiting outside. But as I hung up, the distortion began. I went back inside, my footsteps loud in my own ears. Elena was there, smiling, a glass of wine in her hand. "You're home early," she said, her tone light and airy. "We're just finishing up." David looked at me, his eyes searching mine for any sign of suspicion. He talked about his day, about a merger, about the weather. Language had replaced truth. Every word they spoke was a performance, a layer of PR designed to smooth over the reality of what was happening in the kitchen. I matched their tone. I thanked her for cooking. I apologized for being distracted. We were all speaking the same dialect of deception now. I watched her ladle the soup into 3 bowls, her movements graceful and practiced. They steered me toward the table. It was a subtle choreography, David pulling out my chair, Elena placing the bowl directly in front of me. "It's your favorite," David said, his voice a low hum of feigned affection. He was influencing the scene, making sure I felt comfortable, making sure I didn't hesitate. I could see the steam rising from the broth, smelling the herbs that were supposed to mask the bitterness. They were watching me, their expressions controlled, waiting for that first spoonful. I realized then how much of our marriage had been this kind of manipulation, decisions made behind closed doors, presented to me as inevitabilities. They had decided my ending without my input, and now they were just waiting for the execution. I smiled at them, a hollow gesture that felt like a mask. I picked up my spoon, the silver cool against my thumb. I needed a distraction, a reason to leave the room for just a moment. I looked at the window and mentioned a strange car in the driveway. They both turned to the window, the shared instinct of the guilty. In that 10-second window of their distraction, I moved. I didn't think. I just swapped my plate with Elena's. It was a silent, critical move made in the private theater of our dining room. The betrayal was complete, but the direction had changed. I sat back down just as they turned back, their faces reflecting the brief confusion of seeing nothing outside. Must have been the neighbors, David said, his hand resting on the table near mine. I took a sip of my water, my heart hammering against my ribs. Elena took her first spoonful of the soup. She praised the seasoning, her eyes fixed on me, waiting for me to do the same. I watched her swallow, the true impact of her own plan now coursing through her. She had built this trap, and I had simply stepped out of it, leaving her to find her own way through. The cost of her ambition was now becoming a physical reality. For several minutes, nothing happened. We ate in a silence that felt heavy and expectant. I watched Elena for any sign, any flicker of the end she had promised. The damage was hidden, a silent chemical reaction happening beneath the surface of her elegant silk blouse. She kept talking, planning the next phase of the family's investments, her voice steady and confident. David joined in, his eyes darting between us, a man caught between two worlds. He didn't know the plates had been switched. He thought he was watching me die. The true impact of their actions wasn't visible yet, but the foundation of their world was already crumbling. Every word they spoke about the future was now a lie, a projection into a time that Elena wouldn't see the same way. I felt a strange, cold clarity. I wasn't just surviving, I was witnessing the inevitable consequence of their own choices. Elena paused, her hand going to her throat for just a second. I had prepared for this, even before the soup. While I was in the garden, I'd found the documents David thought were hidden, the ones detailing the offshore transfers and the forged signatures. I had them in my pocket now, a quiet response to their loud intentions. Elena's breath hitched, a small, wet sound that broke the rhythm of the room. She looked at her bowl, then at me, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. She was a strategist, and she was starting to realize the board had changed. I stayed quiet, watching her struggle to maintain her composure. The revenge wasn't the poison, it was the realization. It was the moment she understood that I knew and that I had let her proceed. I was setting the stage for a much larger payoff, one that would dismantle everything they had built. David looked at her, his brow furrowed, but he still didn't understand the depth of the reversal. Elena reached for her wine, but her fingers slipped. The sirens grew louder, a sharp intrusion into our private drama. David jumped up, the hero in his own mind, rushing to the door to guide the paramedics. "Elena's had a reaction," he shouted, his voice full of feigned panic. It appeared the conflict was reaching a resolution, a tragic accident, a medical mystery. He was already framing the story for the outside world, setting up the narrative of the grieving brother and the shocked husband. Elena was slumped in her chair now, her eyes wide and glassy, staring at me with a mixture of horror and recognition. I stood over her, my face a mask of concern for the benefit of the men entering the room. For a moment, it seemed like they would get away with it, that the system would accept their version of events. But I had already made my move. I watched as they lifted her onto the gurney, the blue and red lights dancing across the expensive wallpaper. I leaned in close to David and whispered that I'd already talked to the doctor. The reversal landed at the hospital. When the toxicology report came back, it wasn't just about what was in Elena's system, it was about where it came from. I had handed the paramedics the sample bowl, the one I'd swapped, and the police found the matching vial in David's coat pocket, placed there while he was comforting me. The revenge was inevitable, exploiting their own arrogance. David was arrested in the waiting room, the cameras catching the moment his dominant facade shattered. Elena survived, but the damage to her nervous system was permanent, a physical reminder of her own malice. The aftershock spread through the family, the estate frozen, the reputation they'd spent decades building dissolving in a single news cycle. I sat in our empty house, the silence finally genuine. The system had absorbed the damage and continued, but I was no longer a part of it. I had used their own incentives to destroy them, and the cost was the life I thought I wanted. I looked at the kitchen, now a crime scene taped off in yellow. In the end, nothing really changed. The family name was scrubbed from the boards, the assets liquidated, the lawyers taking their cut. The deeper system, the one driven by power and betrayal, remained untouched. I have the money now, and the house, but I also have the memory of that soup. I see the same patterns in every boardroom, every meeting, every quiet conversation. We all have our incentives, our trade-offs, and our secret endings. I'm just the one who learned how to swap the plates. David sends letters from prison, full of excuses and pleas for forgiveness, but I don't open them. Elena lives in a care facility, her mind sharp, but her body a cage. Justice was done, perhaps, but it didn't feel like a victory. It only felt like a consequence. I walk through the same halls, past the same shadows, knowing that the friction is always there, just waiting for the next early arrival. The story didn't end that day. It just became inevitable. I wonder what's being whispered in the kitchens I haven't entered yet.
Select now another video in our series of family and company dramas. They are all powerful stories of people coming back stronger after they have been humiliated or hurt by family members or their management. Always make sure you stay strong. Let nobody ever tell you what you are worth. You know the best. Of course.